my son needs a healthy, happy parent. Despite all of my best effort, despite all my trying, despite all my crying, despite all my efforts at making this be a thing that can work, this is not working. And I choose me and I choose him and I choose our happiness, even if that means not in this marriage that I PS had only just gotten into a couple of years earlier as a, older adult.
Ever feel like you suck at this job? Motherhood, I mean. Have too much anxiety and not enough patience? Too much yelling, not enough play? There's no manual, no village, and no guarantees. The stakes are high. We want so badly to get it right. But this is survival mode. We're just trying to make it to bedtime. So if you're full of mom guilt, your temper scares you, you feel like you're screwing everything up, and you're afraid to admit any of those things out loud, this podcast is for you. This is Failing Motherhood. I'm Danielle Bettman, and each week we'll chat with a mom ready to be real, sharing her insecurities, her fears, her failures, and her wins. We do not have it all figured out. That's not the goal. The goal is to remind you, you are the mom your kids need. They need what you have, you are good enough, and you're not alone. I hope you pop in earbuds, somehow sneak away, and get ready to hear some hope from the trenches. You belong here, friend. We're so glad you're here. Hey, it's Danielle. Have you ever wondered what life would look like after a divorce? My guest today, Paige Dempsey, is an anti-anxiety, dating, and relationship coach for women. Paige was certified by the Life Coach School and also holds certification in advanced deep dive and feminist coaching. Paige is an expert at helping you get past what is keeping you stuck in your old familial patterns and into something more authentic, empowered, and connected. Her mission is to help women feel better in their relationships with others and, most importantly, with themselves. So in Paige's words, she got married late and divorced early. She's been a stepmom, mom of a child with her ex, and a solo mother by choice. At the same time as her and her husband were separating, her best friend was diagnosed with cancer. For a while there, she felt like she was just getting by. In today's episode, Paige holds nothing back as she narrates her thoughts and feelings both inside and outside of her marriage, and just how much her understanding of and experience of relationships has evolved. She shares the 2 ways she knew divorce was the right decision for her, how she believes divorce can strengthen the kids' experience of and relationship with their fathers, and the mindset she used to move forward without fear. She hopes that listeners hear from her story that there is no prize for suffering, it's okay to do things your own way, and that it's best not to spend a lot of time worrying about what other people think, only what you think. This episode is for you if you ever wondered what's on the other side of a divorce, been intimidated by the thought of leaving or dating again, or just hope to glean wisdom for all your current relationships. Let's dive in. Welcome to Failing Motherhood. My name is Danielle Bettman, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Paige Dempsey. Thank you, Paige, so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Of course. So we are here to talk about life after divorce, and there is nothing that feels more like failing, I'm sure for some, than failing your marriage, failing your white picket fence dream, having, your ideals kind of like self-sabotaged or the knees swept out from under you, and just trying to reimagine what life can look like. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is what life after divorce can look like. But I want to start from the beginning. I want to get to know you. I know we have met. We are local connections, and I'm so excited to kind of share you with my listeners. But let's start at the beginning. Who were you before you got divorced?
Oh, goodness. Well, I was first a stepmother, then I was a mother. And before I got divorced, I was just a really unhappy person who felt like I was almost in a life or death decision at that point. I mean, it was very hard for me to be in that space in my life, especially while being a mother.
Walk us through, how'd you become a mom?
Married late. So I got married by the time lots of people are getting divorced. So I didn't get married till I was 38 years old. I married a man with 2 kids. I always thought, this is amazing. I want to have a big family. I myself was a product of divorce. So I thought I had welcomed that experience rather openly, but it wasn't what I expected. Obviously, step families are very hard, can be very hard, especially if the person that we had in common, which was my now ex husband, wasn't really righting the ship. And once we had our own son about a year later, it just felt like a division between like his kids and our kid, or his first family and our family. And I sort of felt like we were living in two different families a lot of the time. And I would tell him in our multiple therapy sessions, like, hey, if you keep acting like you have two different families, you will eventually have two different families, because this is not at all what I had envisioned for my life and my marriage and my time with my kids, and how I wanted them to grow up, or how I wanted to be in relationship with somebody.
And what did that look like on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, so this would have been, my son's almost 11. So this was 10, 11, 12 years ago. Nowadays, what's typical is kind of a 50-50 split in custody arrangements. But this, 15, 20 years ago, when my ex was first divorced and doing his parenting time, his girls would come over like one night a week or like for a weekend. And so if you can imagine, anytime you have company over, like a sister that's in from out of town, or your cousins are in town, and how it's all kind of disruptive for a weekend. And then like, oh, no, we got to get back to normal. I mean, that was like every other weekend. Right. And then when my son came along, his girls were a little bit older, but I would try to encourage us to do stuff together. Like, hey, let's go to the pumpkin patch. He's two. The next one up would have been like 13 or something. Well, this one doesn't want to do that. And this and that. I'm like, if we had 5 or 6 kids in between, if you had 4 or 5 kids, a 13-year-old and a 2-year-old would surely go to the pumpkin patch together, And so there was just a lot of feeling like, well, they're downstairs in the living room watching a movie together and I'm sort of not welcome. Or, there was a day that he went to a movie with his younger daughter and was like, no, you can't come. And I'm like, what do you mean I can't come? Like, I'm your wife. Like, I'm her mom. Like, what's happening here? So, I mean, we dated for 4 years before we got married. So I don't know. I mean, if I could do it all over again, or like what I know now versus what I knew then, like maybe I should have noticed that some of this was coming. But really, when I had our son, and when I would see him as a little baby or a toddler be sort of put second to what, my ex's girls would need, even though they were older and old enough to really get things for themselves or take care of themselves, I just was always felt placed not just second to his kids, second to his ex-wife, second to his mom, second to his job, then behind our kid. I'm like, I cannot be number 7 all the time and be in this marriage in a way that's going to work. Like, this is just not going to work.
Mm. So how did you come to that conclusion, and how much time did it take you?
I will tell you exactly how I came to this conclusion. It was 2 parts. One part was partly inspired by the work that I used to do. So some of the work that I did and still have done sometimes is this, like, working with organizations and nonprofits and doing like strategic planning. So if you have a job and you have a company, you're always visioning what's happening in 3 to 5 years. And so we were at one of our multiple, again, therapy appointments, and the lady, was doing her procedure where he says something and then I repeat, or I say something and then he repeats. And I was like, listen, we're just going to stop right here. And I looked at him and I said, tell me your vision for our future. Very simply, tell me your vision for our future. That was the whole question. And he responded for like a good 20 minutes. The repeated theme was, I go to work, I come home, I'm a good dad, I take care of the kids. I go to work, I come home, I'm a dad, I take care of the kids. And as this is going on, I can even see the therapist's face just like, uh-oh. The conversation or answer did not include the words wife, partner, marriage, page, spouse, like nowhere. And I was like, okay, this is very interesting. And I was like, let's just try one more time. You told me about the kids. I know you're committed to work. Let's talk about like your vision for our relationship and our marriage. And again, he just could not go there. And I was like, I mean, this is very telling, because we're either going to keep going to counseling for 30 or 40, or we're not going to the same place. Like, he and I are not on the same road. And I don't think any amount of counseling is going to change that. That was part 1. Part 2 is what I started to say at the beginning. And I don't say this lately because it took me 5 years to say it without crying, which is this became kind of a life or death decision for me. Like, when you are that in a dark place for that long and you have a little person to take care of, eventually the decision was like, I'm going to die if I stay. Like, I will get a disease. I mean, something bad is going to happen because I cannot keep living like this. And so for me, it was just that decision of my son needs a healthy, happy parent. Despite all of my best effort, despite all my trying, despite all my crying, despite all my efforts at making this be a thing that can work, this is not working. And I choose me and I choose him and I choose our happiness, even if that means not in this marriage that I PS had only just gotten into a couple of years earlier as
Mm-hmm.
a, older adult. So, I mean, for marriage comparison. Yeah, it's very hard to get married. I mean, we were separated by our 5th anniversary, but you just sometimes know, and
Mm-hmm.
looking at my life and looking at his life, I mean, he was little enough, like his needs were met. He had 2 loving parents, but me trying to be a mom when I'm just like a shell of myself, no way. Like I only ever
Right.
wanted to be a mom. I can't be a mom and just be, I mean, just going through the motions. Like that's just wasn't going to be okay. So that's, just a few years after we got married. Now, mind you, we had dated for 4 or 5 years before that. So there was enough evidence for me to say also, like having that conversation with the therapist, like, this is again, like, it's kind of work lingo, but it totally made sense to me. I'm like, there are no indicators of change. There are
Mm-hmm.
no indicators that he is changing. And if I go all the way, 100% on my end, I'm only 50% of the way there,
Right.
and if every therapist we've talked to, which have been more than one, have said, hey, Matt, you got to let this happen, or you got to try this, or the girls and, your kids and Paige need to have their own relationship. You need to stop getting in the middle of it. Hey, they need to like act like they live at that house and aren't just visiting every weekend, throw in some laundry, do some dishes, pick up a little bit, all of this stuff, nothing ever changed. We just have to decide like again, it wasn't like, oh, he's made a little bit of strides or whatever. And he is a good person. Like we get along really well now, but this family dynamic and this family unit, I kept feeling like like an unwanted person in my own home, like a stranger, like
Mm,
not welcome when his girls were here as part of that family. And I'm like, this is not no, this is not it's like the opposite of what I wanted. I was like, bring everybody, bring the stepkids, right? Like
right.
so that was that. Like,
Yeah.
and it's
Heartbreaking.
hard and heartbreaking. And nobody goes into marriage like at 38 wanting to you don't ever get married wanting to get divorced.
Right.
But I also didn't want to live in a marriage like that and in a family like that and in a life that was like that. And I think, God bless that I had the means and the capability to get divorced.
Mm-hmm.
Your mom and your grandma and your great grandma, they all might have wanted to get divorced too. All this longevity and marriages used to be forever. I'm like, that doesn't mean that they were good. Right. So,
Yeah.
I would think about myself in those times and think, I do not have the constitution to sit here and suffer for the next 50 years. I literally cannot do it. So that is not an option for me. Like
Mm-hmm.
physically, mentally, emotionally, like whatever the ladies did 100 years ago, God bless them because they had no other choices. But
Yeah.
that is not going to be for me. And so it began.
And as hard as that decision is to make, you want to have that clarity. You want to know that it is the right decision for you and that you have security in backing yourself up and being, your own best advocate in that moment. And that's still really hard to do because there's a grief process there. There's, very bittersweet aspects about your commitment in your relationship, all of it. But for you, did you have any fears or preconceived notions of what life was going to look like on the other side of that decision that kind of like made you take pause?
I don't think so, but I do want to go back to something you just said about having the
Yeah.
clarity around getting divorced. And
Yeah.
as we'll talk more about what I do now and the work that I do as a coach, I don't know. I mean, I had clarity that this was the route for me.
Hmm.
I don't think all women need certainty and clarity because you're always going to be waiting. The way you get clarity is you decide for yourself. And that's an important distinction is that, well, if there's enough people that say it's okay, or if just the right job comes along or whatever is you get clarity by deciding this is the decision
Hmm.
and then you figure it the F out. So
Yeah.
no, I do not remember having like fears of like being, I'm like, I'll just figure it out. I mean, my parents got divorced when I was like 10. So I know that. I mean, I've experienced divorce from three ways. I experienced it as a kid, I experienced it as a stepmom, and now I've experienced it as a parent. So divorce itself is not something that I was afraid of. The compounding factor that I also had going at the very same time is during this like 2-year process of just marriage turmoil. My best friend from 30 years got diagnosed with colon cancer. And so I had literally a 2 or 3 year period of just like divorce, cancer, attorney this day, chemo treatment that day. And really, and I had just quit my job and I was becoming self employed.
No biggie.
Super major life traumas, all kind of happening at the same time. But to answer your question, the only clarity that we can have is the one within ourselves. And the life that I was experiencing, I was so distraught in that whatever was on the other side, I knew would be better. And I would have more space to make it better, whatever that would be.
Yeah.
And I did. And I have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you have that same mentality for your son? As in, life will be better on the other
Oh,
side of this for him
absolutely.
as well.
Absolutely. Yes. And I am lucky in the sense his dad, my ex, is a good man and he's a great dad and he's good with kids. And so I never worried about that. I know for some women that's really challenging. I
Yeah.
would also offer, though, for any woman who's thinking about getting divorced, that I know many women, I have friends. I mean, once you get divorced, you start, making divorce friends that
Mm-hmm.
I think in some cases, divorce is like one of the best things to happen to fatherhood
Tell me more about that.
because in a lot of cases, not all, but in a lot of women that I've talked to, the men were just doing the bare minimum. They were kind of riding the coattails. The women did all the things. And even in a good marriage, like the women do a lot of the things, right? So, I know for a lot of like friends of mine, once now that they've been divorced, the dad has to plan some things to do. They got to be a dad. They got to go to the park. They got to take them on the soccer trip. They got to show up. They got to clean up. They got to make them breakfast. They got to make them dinner. They got to put them to bed. And a lot of times in a, two-parent household, that just the dads just kind of don't always do their fair share. So, I think unless the man is really terrible and you need to protect your children, that's another story. But
Right.
it really is an opportunity. Like I have less time with my son, but the time that we have is focused and the time that he has with his dad is focused. And as kids get older, so when we separated, he was 3, almost 4. But as he's gotten older and has had sports and activities and school stuff, I see him almost every day, maybe 6 out of 7 days a week, just because like there's a
Mm-hmm.
basketball game, there's a soccer game. Maybe he comes to my house after school, but it's dad's night. We got piano. So that has helped too. Also, when he was young, when we separated, I made a custody schedule that switched every couple days just because he was little, so
Mm-hmm.
you can make that experience like whatever you want it to be as best that you can.
And how did you leverage the things that you had control over? Like you just said, the one great example is that alternating schedule being, a lot more quick to transition back and forth. What other things did you feel like you did well in that time, in that first few years of transitioning out?
One thing that I would suggest that I did that I know a lot of women do or try to do is connect with other divorced women. So that was a good support for me personally. And even just the technicalities of like, make sure this is in your divorce agreement or make sure you think about holidays this way. Or so I had a lot of inputs. And
Mhm.
again, having been a divorced kid, having been married to a man with kids, in their schedule and all that, and then having one of our own, I had that experience. I would say one thing I would do better now that I didn't do as well then is being less reactive to his behavior and his words and his whatever, because it's so hard and you take things so personally. And in the last, 4, 5, 6 years, therapy, with coaching, with just life and time, we get along now probably better than we ever have.
Mm.
But plot twist.
Mhm.
I didn't even see that coming. But it's like once all the stuff is kind of behind you, and then we just get to parent, and I don't have to be disappointed or angry at him all the time, then we just get to go. And the frustration of a lot of that day-to-day stuff is just not there.
Sure. There's not that weight of resentment or the unspoken, unmet expectations and all of the other kind of emotional baggage that we have in our relationships. It's just, is what it is.
Yes. So one thing that we haven't talked about yet is that I, post-divorce, had a baby by myself on purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for women that aren't familiar with that, it's called being a single mom by choice. But this brings forward this idea of being partnered versus being a single mom. I divorced a good guy, and I think being a single mom is 1,000 times easier. And I'll tell you why. It's the exact thing that you just said, which are unmet expectations. When I had my son, now granted, we were in sort of the dysfunction of the step family setup that was not amazing. But I remember with my first one, when I was married, it always feels like it was like an accounting, like I was up last night, you need to get up tonight. I did the breastfeeding, you need to wash the bottles. I did the bath, you need to do the bedtime. I did this, you need to make dinner. You didn't take the trash out. I did this other thing. And I will tell you, as a single mom, even with just my son before I had my second by myself, like, you just don't have to argue with people. Like, all of that just kind of goes away. If the dishes aren't done tonight, that's okay. But I don't have that, when you're in a partnership, you're sort of like, well, should he be doing the dishes? Should I be doing the dishes? I did them last time. It's his time to do them tonight. And so without that constant, disappointment or stress or need of expectations and who does what, it's a lot kind of easier just to do parenting, I think, and life. Now, that being said, I'm also one that mows the yard, and I'm also one that shovels the snow, and I'm also the one that does all the dishes, and I'm also the one that does all of the laundry, and so on.
Right.
And so, it would be nice to have a partner to like split the chores with sometimes. But I will tell you, there's just a lot of, I guess maybe I just have more energy to put towards life and parenting instead of spending it trying to fix or change this other person that isn't what I want them to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that does just suck so much out of your capacity.
Yeah.
Especially when you feel stuck. Yeah.
Yes. So there is life on the other side, for sure.
So, big emotions from little people are running the show at your house. Is that right? Do they fall apart when something doesn't go their way? Ugh, just once. Why can't they accept the fact that the answer is no? Am I right? The struggle is real. You're not alone, and you're in the right place. When your days are filled with relentless pushback, it is so hard to feel like a good parent. Especially when your in-laws aren't shy in sharing how they think your kids just need a good spanking. Every time you lose it when they lose it, you feel like a failure. The worst part is, without addressing the root of your child's behavior, you're doomed to play a fruitless game of whack-a-mole, reacting rather than preventing the next conflict. And next time, nothing's going to go differently. The good news is, when you have a handful of effective discipline tools in your pocket, you're able to step into full confidence as their parent. Parenting actually becomes a whole lot easier. I promise, you're not failing them. You just need more tools. So if you have a tiny human who's full of love and yet so difficult, if you can only be so nice for so long, if you've tried everything and still feel defeated on the daily, my free class, Authentic and Unapologetic, is for you. In this free training, I share 5 huge misconceptions in parenting strong-willed kids that inadvertently invite defiance, 4 mistaken goals they're using their behavior to meet and what to do about it, how to let judgment roll off your back and truly feel like the parent your kids need, and why what you're currently doing just isn't working and isn't going to anytime soon. So go to parentingwholeheartedly.com/unapologetic to access this exclusive free training immediately. That's parentingwholeheartedly.com/unapologetic. The link will be in the show notes. When did you get a coach? Because I know that you have personally gone through coaching and then became one. So how did you benefit from coaching yourself?
Yeah. So my coaching journey started probably about 5 years ago. So I had lost my dad when I was like right about when I was getting married, right before that time I was getting married. So my dad had died, going through my separation and divorce. I've used a lot of therapy and mental health supports. And I think everybody should who can, whether in a book, a podcast, a therapist, whatever. And about 2019, so friend had died, divorce was finished. I stumbled over a podcast that really resonated with me by a feminist coach, Carl Lowenthal. She's at Unfuck Your Brain podcast, if you're not familiar. And her way of sort of teeing up this type of work just really resonated with me. So then I went to one of her weekend courses that was offered that fall and came back and signed up for my coaching certification the following spring. But coaching is I think I have grown and changed and elevated and evolved like so much from my work, my own coaching journey and coaching others and being like in a community of coaches who are the most supportive, well-trained, thoughtful humans that I have ever met. And I just really like the idea. So the thing that I know now that I didn't know when I was married and divorced is that we have a lot of control over how we experience our lives and our relationships. And I think 10 years ago, I felt more, I don't know if victimized is the word I really want to use, but sort of beholden to how I was being treated.
At the mercy of the circumstances.
At the mercy of the circumstances. Now, the decision in the end might have been the same, but I probably would have had a lot less suffering getting there. You know what I mean? Like we get to choose how we think and feel about these relationships that we're in. We get to, stand up and say like, this is not what I want, which I did do that for sure when I was married and sad and, going to therapy. But yeah, my own coaching journey, it kind of ebbs and flows a little bit. I'm really lucky to be in a community of coaches where I can, I meet with people regularly that are just colleagues now. And so I get sort of like free coaching. But, therapy is really good for sort of looking backwards. Coaching is really good we do look backwards sometimes if that's what's keeping us stuck, but it's really giving you tools to help yourself develop skills and whatever to like move forward in any relationship that you're in. That's the other thing that I love about coaching. I know I've had a couple experiences with therapists that might resonate for people. Experience number one is like, oh my God, I can't do anything and I got to talk to my therapist. Well, then you're like really dependent on this other person to like tell you what to do or what to think or how to feel. And like, that's not empowering, right?
Right.
And then a few times I've had therapists where after a while, they're like, I don't know, you seem good. Okay, well,
good is relative.
How are we moving forward though? Like, let's keep moving.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So
I still don't feel like I know what to do tomorrow. So yeah.
Yeah. And so this coaching is a good mix. It's sort of therapeutic and it's just a way of sort of empowering people. And I particularly like working with women on how you can find a solution or get unstuck or feel better or make a clearer decision, regardless of like what circumstance you're in. And then the other part is that gets missed a lot, I think, in social media, feel better Instagram posts, is that you're actually supposed to be sad when sad things happen, and you're supposed to grieve when something happens that causes grief. And learning how to allow space for that or how to like process it sort of out of like through your system is another thing that's just like really important to do, because just staying stuck being sad is like, it's good for a while if you're grieving or mourning or, something. But after a while, it becomes kind of like unhelpful sadness sometimes. And
Mhm.
so we have to just sort of learn, like, at some point, it's not just sadness, it's like stuckness. And we keep ourselves stuck because we keep thinking about the sadness. And so, there's kind of a balance between the actions that we need to take. But before we take the actions, we got to get our thoughts and feelings cleaned up. And sometimes it's the feelings first, and sometimes it's the thoughts first. And it's all kind of connected.
Yes. Such a great way to explain it because it sounds kind of convoluted and messy as you explain it, but you explained it so well that like we're with you. And that's just
Yeah.
what it looks like in life is it looks kind of messy and feels a little bit messy. But at
Yeah.
the
Well, and I mean,
end, like it makes everything kind of fall into place, like where life becomes much more like, okay, I understand how this part of me works and how to work with it, or I know how this situation, is continuing to stay with me and how I can be aware of that, or you know what I mean? Like, talk to me about more of what it looks like to be on the other side of, you never just enlightened and you arrive and everything's perfect and, you have the answer for everything in life in real time. But what can life look like when you have a lot of that kind of worked on?
gosh, I would say my life is calmer. I'm less reactive. I feel, I don't know, more empowered or like more confident in my decisions,
Hmm.
thoughtful about how I show up. I don't hold on to things. I don't take things personally much, which is a huge, like, if you can like let that go, you got a whole bunch of space in life for other stuff. I just think I'm like really way more thoughtful about my relationships in general. And that includes my relationship with myself.
Hmm.
So letting go of shame or being more compassionate or understanding that, I'm doing my best or
Yeah.
I'm just thinking like some things that have come up for me lately. Sometimes as a woman, especially, and as we have kids and as we get older, and maybe when there's a life change like a divorce or just time, like if you're 50 instead of 20, like sometimes friendships don't last or they don't come along with you through these hardships, or they might for a while, but then it's different. Or, I think just allowing space that it's all just like part of the process and all part of the journey and it's all part of the growth. And we don't have to hold on to this thing that we had 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Like, you don't get a certificate for that. There's no prize for like holding on to suffering or like relationships that you've outgrown. There's no other than society saying like, oh, my, whatever. So the benefit is always to the person. So all of us women are doing our self work and we're buying books and we're listening to podcasts, and that's all amazing. But when you really like work on yourself, like whatever that means for you, then the benefit is for you. The people around you might also be crazy, but it's like you have the benefit of like, we just let it roll a lot of the
Yep.
time. I coach women on dating and relationships a lot and just relationships in general. And the thing that I say sometimes is I took my anxiety from a 10 to a 2. People are like, well, why at the 2? Like, what about a 0 or 1? I'm like, listen, I'm still human. I still get frustrated. I still get that emotional nervous system flare up occasionally, but the flare is lower. The peaks are not as high and the valleys are not as low. And then the space in between is longer. So I just have a lot more then if something is a flare up, then I'm like, oh, I need to pay attention to this, right? Like,
Hmm.
what's going on here? Like,
It's the
what's bringing
exception to
this
the
up?
rule. So yeah, that sounds important.
But I will say now that I'm talking about this, because I think this is important too, and I've only learned this kind of recently, when people are way high or way low, when your nervous system is way overactivated or underactivated, if you're, in a deep depression or just hyper, like those are not the time to make changes. It's not going to work. It's not going to stick. So, that's something that I would share also is that I had a very long period of a very sad and serious depression. Those are not the times to like improve your life. Those are the times that you're just like, I just need to go till tomorrow or maybe like for the
Hmm.
next hour. And we ate a lot of pizza and mac and cheese at that time. Like, it's fine.
Hmm.
So sometimes we are in surviving mode and then sometimes we are in thriving mode. But if you are underwater, then we need to get back up to like the surface. Then when things are stabilized, then we work on like, okay, let's improve. Let's do all that stuff.
Totally makes sense. And all of those outcomes that you were naming is exactly what I help my clients with as well, and what they end up getting through the process of working on themselves as a parent, because we're just so intertwined. Like who we are every moment of the day is who we are as a parent. And it affects that relationship with our kids just as much as it would with what we bring into marriage or what we bring into a friendship. It is the core of us and our thoughts and feelings and, ability to take things personally or not. And it is so worth the freedom that comes on the other side of making those painful yet powerful realizations of, I have more control over this than I think, and I can react differently even though this person's behavior isn't changing yet or ever. I just think that, that is what the work is. And in my opinion, I found a lot of that at Al-Anon when I first started there and hadn't, heard any of these concepts, like, looking out for your
Mm-hmm.
own well-being and what that can look like. But I wish everybody, had a mandatory phase of life where you go through this process.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and you probably see with your clients also that when one person starts to change, sometimes the other people come along, even if they're not the
Mhm.
one getting coached or seeing a therapist or whatever. And sometimes they
Oh, yeah.
don't, right? But either way, good information.
Yes. Yes. And that's
Yes.
where doing it with your partner is huge, because then that ripple effect is like multiplied. And yeah, you absolutely have an equation in your family of like A plus B equals C. And when A changes to be a different number, C has to change. Even though if
Right.
B is your child, they're still living their life and nobody has talked to them about anything differently. The relationship dynamic, the culture of your home, and what that looks like day to day is 100% going to change when you change. And usually changes to exactly what you hoped would happen when you were trying to fix your kid the whole time.
Yeah.
So, how did you decide to focus in on dating?
That is one thing that I think women just need a lot of support in. So I always like to say I'm a dating and relationship coach, and the and relationship would sort of include, family, partner, coworker, whatever. But having gotten married late and then divorced early, I've sort of seen this dating conundrum on all sides. And the thing that frustrates me the most is kind of circling back to the same theme of our conversation, is that women get so frustrated with the process or somebody they go out with, and they take it personally, like, oh, I
Mhm.
was talking to this guy on Tinder, I was talking to somebody on Bumble, and then they ghosted me, dot dot dot, what's wrong with me? And I'm
Mm,
here to tell you that there's nothing wrong with you. This is just part of the process. And so my goal working with women, which I know is the same for you, is like really, again, empowering our choices. Not just the choices we make about who we're connecting with and how we're showing up online, but how we're making sense of like the experience that we're having. I just really want women to stop feeling, hurt or victimized or like, oh, this guy this and this guy did that. And then I have to be sad because he ghosted me, or he, we talked for 3 weeks and now he's not contacting me. And I'm like, that's not because of you. Number one. Number two, some relationships are only meant to last 3 weeks. Like this is just how it goes. This is not like everybody we have one date with is someone we're going to marry for 20 years. So I just think women, especially if you're on like the second half of life, or, maybe married your college sweetheart, or, even for me, there's just like a new world of dating that I like to provide support around.
yeah, I'm sure it feels like a minefield. There's all sorts of triggers and situations and, yeah, input that is going to send you spiraling or questioning or second guessing yourself and, really creating a lot of volatility in maybe your identity or your self image or your confidence. And I can only imagine just how much you have to feel resilient and confident to be able to navigate that as scot free as possible.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what I've noticed myself. I've been divorced now, 6 or 7 years. And so, I used to be the girl that was like checking my phone every 5 minutes to see if so and so messaged me and, getting really attached. And I mean, there's just so much freedom and like not having those quick attachments and feeling, all in on somebody that you met 3 weeks ago on the internet, and not tying up your self worth in like what all these other people think about you. I mean, that is, I think, the
Mm,
work for all women is like not And rightfully so. Like we have been taught since we were little girls, like, does a boy on the playground have a crush on you? My daughter's too. And like, I am not going to be asking her about any crushes until she's 30 because like, this is not what women are only here to do is have, men have crushes on them. But that is the messaging that we've gotten from society our whole lives is that you want to be picked and by a man and that your whole worth and value is coming from being picked by a man and being in a relationship. And so I think once we let go of that, then we get to be choosy and kind of raise the standard a little bit about who we even want to pick us or if we want to even be picked. Or do I want to be picked right now? Or do I not want to be picked right now? So it's just like a whole different way to approach dating and relationships. And, it's funny because I see a lot of women on the moms groups or the Facebook groups like, oh, this is so frustrating. Dating sucks. I hate the whole thing. And I'm like, I just don't think it's that big of a problem. Like, because I just don't make it a big problem. If I'm not getting anywhere in a conversation with a guy, I just peace out. Like, I don't have to put a lot of emotional energy into it. I save that for other things like my kids and my parenting or work that is more important. Then if you get some traction, then you can put a little emotional investment into it. But I think there are ways you teach parents, mothers with kids how to do this. And I teach women in dating and personal relationships how to do it is to just like pace yourself and sort of be more in control of how you experience these situations and experiences.
Yeah. And when you are given the chance, like, you get to step up on your soapbox and give like your number one piece of advice or insight for dating women, what do you want them to know?
Yeah, for women who are dating, I just think, the best relationship you're ever going to have is the one that you have with yourself. So once you get that cleaned up and sort of like that relationship, then you will only attract other good relationships to you. And that would be for a partner. That is for friendship. That is for, coworkers, for everybody.
And easier said than done sometimes, because that could be years of, really working on that.
Yeah. What's just coming to mind too? I was talking with a woman yesterday, and this happens pretty frequently when I'm talking to women around relationship coaching, is that a lot of women, doctors, lawyers, professionals, moms, everybody, I'm in my 30s and I don't know how to make friends, or I'm in my 40s and I don't know how to make friends. And so we're all just like back to the basics again. Like, how do I connect with people? How do I make relationships? You've seen this, and like, we're in a mom's group, or I'm in an over 35 group, I'm in an over 40 group. Everybody's got the same thing. Like, you just make an invitation and then you start trying to be friends, like this is just how it goes. And again, related to dating, not all of those friendships or relationships are going to be forever. Like, you might go out and have drinks with a lady once or twice or have a coffee and then you never see him again. This might be something that, become a mom friend. This might be a person that you see 3 times a year. You just have to be open to the experience of meeting new people. And I was like, sometimes I think women want to like skip the line. Like, they just want to have a relationship. And I'm like, no, you gotta like you gotta do the work of like getting to know somebody or like feeling uncomfortable. It's almost like going on a first date for a mom friend or a regular first date, like open up a little, let them open up a little, see if you guys connect. And if you don't, like, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just part of like being a human out here in the world, like trying to make connections. So don't be afraid to just put yourself out there, because I know that there's 40, 50, 100 other women that are just like looking for somebody like you to date, to be friends with, to hang out with. You know what I mean? Like, that.
Yeah. Oh, we need to hear that on repeat sometimes. Let's just take a recording of what Paige just said and play that on our alarm on our phone every morning.
Yes, do that. I support that idea. I posted on Facebook this morning, everything you want's on the other side of discomfort. And I think that is like the most true thing that I just keep coming back to. Well, I don't want to get hurt if I'm dating, or I don't want this lady, high profile physician yesterday that I was coaching. Well, I've got a new mom friend, but what if she doesn't like me? And I'm like, what if she doesn't like you? And then she sat there and she's like, well, I guess it's okay. And I was like, yeah, it's fine. Because the thing is, we know as we get older, and if we have a good relationship with ourselves, that we always have our own back, right? So if that guy on Tinder doesn't want to date me, or that girl that I reached out to for coffee and I don't really hit it off, like, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. You'll survive.
This is how it keeps coming back around. Yes. And then we meet other people
Yes.
that are more excited or have more time or space, or that it aligns a little bit better.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so good. I feel like we could keep talking about this for a while, but I know we have to wrap up.
Ever.
So,
Yeah.
where can listeners connect with your work and hear more from you?
Yes. PaigeDempseyCoaching.com, dating coach Paige on Instagram and TikTok, and Paige Dempsey Coaching on Facebook. Would love to connect. And I love, love, love coaching women through all of your relationships. So reach out if that's something that you think you need help with.
Yes, I highly recommend. And the last question I ask on every episode is, how are you the mom your kids need?
Oh my God, I'm exactly the mom my kids need because I just decided that it was so. And I think our relationship is so dear and so genuine and different than the one that I had growing up in a way that is not perfect and not
Mhm.
organized and not, perfectly decorated for Pinterest at all times, but that is open and joyful and honest and caring. And so I hope that that is how I am the perfect mom for them.
Oh, no question. They are lucky to have you.
Thank
Yes.
you.
But thank you so much for just pouring your heart into this episode. I feel like there was so much honesty and just so much of your story we can pull wisdom from, and so much tangible advice for wherever a listener might be at in this journey of relating to you. So thanks again for your time and for just all that vulnerability. It's so appreciated.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Failing Motherhood. Your kids are so lucky to have you. If you loved this episode, take a screenshot right now and share it in your Instagram stories and tag me. If you're loving the podcast, be sure that you've subscribed and leave a review so we can help more moms know that they are not alone if they feel like they're failing motherhood on a daily basis. And if you're ready to transform your relationship with your strong-willed child and invest in the support you need to make it happen, schedule your free consultation using the link in the show notes. I can't wait to meet you. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. I believe in you, and I'm cheering you on.